Hello everyone, I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Get comfortable and relax. Story 1. It was a quiet weekend in early autumn when I decided to go on a camping trip with two of my close college friends. I'll call them Ryan and Jamie to keep their identities private. We'd been talking for weeks about doing something outdoors before the cold set in, and with a free weekend ahead, we finally committed to making it happen. None of us were particularly experienced in outdoor activities, except for Jamie, who had done plenty of hiking and camping in the past. He became our unofficial guide for the weekend, and we all felt a little more confident knowing someone in our group actually knew what they were doing. Jamie had a particular spot in mind, a place by a river that was a few miles deep into the woods. It wasn't a well-known campsite, but that was part of the appeal. It promised seclusion, nature, and quiet. The three of us met early that Saturday morning, packed up our gear and drove out to the trailhead. The sky was clear, the breeze was cool, and the trees along the drive had just begun to turn shades of amber and crimson. It was the perfect setting for a full weekend. We parked the car and began our hike through the woods. Jamie led the way, confidently navigating the winding path that gradually became less defined the deeper we went. The sun filtered through the trees above, casting long, dappled shadows across the forest floor. It took us over an hour to reach the spot Jamie had talked about. It was exactly as he'd described. A wide open field nestled between the dense woods and a gently flowing river. The sound of the water was peaceful, and the isolation made it feel like we'd stumbled upon a forgotten world. There was no one else in sight, which was both a relief and a bit eerie. We set up our tents right in the middle of the field, giving ourselves plenty of space. The grass was soft beneath our feet, and the sun still hung high enough in the sky to give us several hours of daylight. We unpacked our sleeping bags, got a small campfire going, and cracked open a few beers to celebrate. We laughed, swapped stories, and let the time pass without checking our phone. It felt good to disconnect. But not long after we'd settled in, I noticed something strange near the edge of the tree line. A few figures, barely visible, seemed to be standing in the shadows. They weren't moving, just watching. They looked like hunters at first glance, dressed in camouflage or tattered outdoor gear, but there were no rifles or visible gear. Their clothes were dirty and dark, blending into the forest in a way that made them difficult to focus on. I pointed them out to the others. Jamie looked concerned, his expression instantly shifting from relaxed to tense. He said hunting in this area was illegal, and it wasn't even hunting season. Ryan tried to lighten the mood with a joke, brushing it off as nothing, but Jamie didn't laugh. We kept an eye on the figures for a while, but they eventually vanished back into the woods. We tried not to dwell on it too much and returned to our campfire conversations, although the laughter didn't come as easily as it had before. As the sun dipped below the horizon and the temperature dropped, we decided it was time to head to our tents. The hike had worn us out, and the cool night air made the sleeping bags look more inviting than ever. I climbed into my tent and zipped it shut. The silence was deep, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves in the breeze and the steady murmur of the river nearby. I wasn't used to camping and found it hard to fall asleep. The tent felt both too open and too confining. I lay there, staring at the thin nylon wall, listening to every sound, every creak of a tree branch or distant animal call. 2 hours must have passed as I lay there, tossing and turning, until I heard something that made me completely alert. Footsteps. At first I thought it was Ryan or Jamie. Maybe one of them had gotten up to use the bathroom or check on something outside. But I quickly realized that the footsteps were too numerous and too synchronized. There weren't just one or two. It sounded like a small group, maybe 3 or 4 people, walking slowly and deliberately across the field, heading directly toward our tents. My heart pounded in my chest. I sat up quietly, pressing my ear against the tent wall, trying to make sense of what I was hearing. There were no flashlights, no talking, just the sound of boots crunching lightly through the grass. That was when the fear really hit me. If they were just passing through, why walk this close to our camp? And why no lights? I reached for the zipper but froze. If I made noise, would they know I was awake? I couldn't see anything through the tent, but I imagined them getting closer, closing the distance, walking right past us. I held my breath. The footsteps came within a few feet of our tents. I didn't move. I didn't dare. Then, slowly, the sound began to fade. They were walking away, continuing on past us and toward the river or the woods beyond. I waited until I could barely hear them anymore, then quietly unzipped my tent just a few inches to peek outside. At that exact moment, Ryan's tent unzipped too. We locked eyes, both of us clearly terrified, and then turned our gaze out into the field. The figures were still visible, just barely, walking away into the darkness. I slipped out of my tent and crept over to Jamie's. I whispered his name and gently shook his shoulder. He woke up, blinking in confusion, but as soon as we told him what had happened, the concern in his expression returned tenfold. Unlike us, he'd been camping for years. He knew how unusual, how deeply unnatural it was to encounter something like this. We decided to leave immediately. We didn't even bother to pack everything neatly. We stuffed what we could into our bags, collapsing the tents as quickly as possible. We hadn't turned on any lights, trying to avoid drawing attention. The silence was suffocating as we moved. But just as we were finishing, Jamie let out a whispered, shaky voice. We looked up and followed his gaze toward the woods. There, standing just inside the tree line, were the people. Now that they were closer, I could count at least 6 of them. They were motionless, watching us. My stomach turned. I didn't want to think about how long they had been standing there. We didn't wait. We grabbed our bags and ran. The trail was rough without light. The darkness made it feel unfamiliar, even though we'd walked it just that morning. We kept our lights off, hoping that if they were following us, they'd have a harder time spotting us. We stumbled, tripped over roots, and ran through branches that scratched at our arms and faces. Every few seconds, I would glance over my shoulder, half expecting to see shadowy figures behind us. Somehow, we made it back to the car. The keys shook in Jamie's hand as he unlocked the doors. We piled in, slammed the doors shut, and drove off, our breathing heavy, our clothes damp with sweat. No one spoke for several minutes. Eventually, Jamie said what we were all thinking, that what we experienced wasn't just an odd encounter. It felt deliberate, as though we had stumbled upon something we weren't supposed to see. Those people, whoever they were, didn't want us there. They knew we were watching. They knew where we were. We still talk about that night sometimes, and even though the memory has dulled with time, the details haven't. That field, that walk through the woods, the silent group moving past our tents in the dark, it's all still vivid. Jamie never returned to that campsite again, and neither did we. Story 2. When I was 13, my world was still small. Summer had this way of stretching time, of making days feel endless in the best kind of way. My routines were simple. I'd wake up, turn on the TV, grab something from the fridge, and sink into hours of playing video games, usually on my PS3. Sometimes I'd bike around the neighborhood or hang out with a friend or two, but when it rained I stayed in, curled up in the comfort of the familiar. This particular day was one of those rainy ones. Steady, cold, grey rain, the kind that makes the whole house feel quieter than usual. My dad worked until 10 p.m. every day, and my mum was a nurse with a schedule that changed from week to week. That day she was working a late shift too, so from the moment I woke up, I knew I'd be home alone most of the day. It didn't bother me. I was used to it. By the time evening rolled around, I'd been on the PS3 for hours. The rain was still coming down, tapping against the windows like a soft, endless rhythm. Around 7 p.m, I paused the game and got up to make some food. I remember walking into the kitchen, the room dim from the cloudy skies outside, the overhead lights casting soft shadows. I was making something quick, probably microwavable, when I heard a knock at the front door. It was a sharp sound, unexpected. My whole body tensed. I didn't move at first. I wasn't expecting anyone. We weren't the kind of family that got visitors without warning, and with my parents both at work, there was no reason for anyone to be at our house. I froze, listening. Another knock. As a kid, I had a habit of getting nervous when someone was at the door, especially if I was alone. I tried to be quiet, hoping that whoever it was would just assume no one was home and leave. I tiptoed to the edge of the hallway, close enough to peek down toward the door but still hidden. The knocks came again, louder this time. Eventually curiosity got the better of me. I crept closer and looked through the peephole. A man was standing on our porch, wearing a police uniform. For a moment I felt both confused and relieved. A police officer? What could a cop possibly want with me? He stood under the porch light looking around as if waiting for someone to open the door. His clothes were soaked from the rain. His hair was slick against his forehead, but something about him didn't feel right. I couldn't place it immediately, but I hesitated. Everything in me said something was off. Still, I felt like I had to open the door. He was a cop, wasn't he? I slowly unlocked the door and opened it just a few inches. The cold air rushed in, along with the smell of wet concrete and something else. Something I couldn't identify. He looked down at me and smiled. But the smile wasn't comforting. His teeth were rotting, yellowed and broken. His uniform was stained and unkempt. His badge was dull, not the gleaming kind I'd seen on real officers. And strangest of all, there was no police car. I glanced beyond him into the street. Nothing. Just the rain falling steadily onto the road. "Are you my name?" he asked. I nodded slowly. He tried to sound friendly, told me everything was fine, that I had nothing to worry about. But then his tone shifted. He said he needed to come inside, that he had to search the home. My skin crawled. Everything about this felt wrong. My instincts were screaming. I asked him why. He deflected the question, said it was routine. But I knew something wasn't right. I looked again. No squad car, no radio on his shoulder, no flashlight or belt mount gear like real officers carried. Just a soaked man with a crooked smile, claiming to be someone he wasn't, and he took a step forward. That was when I slammed the door shut. The sound of the lock clicking into place felt like the loudest thing in the world. I backed away, heart pounding, every muscle in my body shaking. Then came the loudest bang I'd ever heard. He slammed something hard against the door. The force of it pushed me back a step. It sounded like metal, maybe a crowbar, maybe something worse. He didn't yell. He didn't speak. He just kept slamming it against the door again and again. The entire house shook with each hit. I stumbled back and ran to the kitchen, grabbing the cordless phone. My fingers fumbled over the buttons as I dialed 911. The operator answered, but I could barely speak. My words were jumbled and panicked, but I managed to tell her that someone was trying to break in, that he was pretending to be a cop, that he was outside my front door right now. She stayed on the line with me, trying to keep me calm. I remember crouching behind the couch, clutching the phone, hearing the continued banging. It felt like forever. Every second was stretched thin by adrenaline. And then, all at once, it stopped. I held my breath. Outside, through the narrow slit between the curtains, I saw flashing red and blue lights flood the street. Real ones this time. The man turned and tried to speak with them. I couldn't hear what was said, but the moment was short-lived. The officers drew their weapons and quickly took him into custody. They found no ID, no badge, no reason for him to be there. When my parents came home, I could see the fear on their faces. My mum held me for a long time. My dad talked to the police, his voice tense and low. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in my room with the door locked, every creak and sound outside making me flinch. For a while, they didn't tell me what the man's intentions were. I think they were trying to protect me, to preserve what innocence I had left. But a few years later, when I was old enough to ask and ready to hear, they told me the truth. During the interrogation, the man confessed. He had been watching me for days. He knew my parents' schedules. He knew I'd be alone. He dressed as a cop to gain my trust. His goal? Kidnapping. He had planned everything, right down to knocking at the exact time he knew I'd be in the kitchen. If I had hesitated just a moment longer, if I had let him in, I try not to think about it. It was one of those moments that rewires your sense of safety. From that day on, I never opened the door without checking, never trusted a uniform blindly, and never again underestimated that small voice in the back of my mind, the one that told me something was wrong. He was never released, but I still lock every door, every night, just in case. Story 3. For the past several years, I've worked the night shift at a small gas station just outside of town. It's a simple job, the kind that keeps a person grounded in routine. I clock in at 8 p.m. and take over from the day shift worker who usually leaves the moment I walk in. Most nights are slow, predictable, and uneventful. For the first couple of hours, we get a decent number of customers, people stopping in to pay for gas, grab snacks, or stock up on energy drinks to get them through a late drive. It keeps me occupied until around 11 or midnight. After that, things slow down considerably. That's when the hours begin to stretch and the quiet starts to feel heavy. That night was no different. I came in just before 8, said my usual hellos, and the day worker left without much chatter. I settled into my routine, counting out the register, restocking the fridge, organizing the shelves. By the time midnight rolled around, it had been nearly an hour since I'd seen a customer. I kept myself busy for a while, refilling the gum racks and cleaning behind the counter, but eventually there was little left to do. I was sitting behind the register, absent-mindedly scrolling through my phone, when I noticed a car pull into the parking lot. It didn't go to the pumps, which was odd in itself. Instead, it parked in one of the spots directly in front of the entrance. That was unusual, especially this late at night. Most people who show up around this time are just trying to get fuel and leave. Rarely does anyone come in to shop after midnight. I watched the car through the glass doors, waiting for someone to step out, but no one did. A couple of minutes passed. The engine was off, the headlights dark. I leaned forward to get a better look, but the reflection of the store lights on the glass made it hard to see inside the vehicle. From what I could tell, someone was in the driver's seat, but they weren't moving. I waited, figuring maybe they were on the phone or simply taking a break from a long drive. It wasn't my business. And after a while, I returned to my phone. 20 minutes passed without a sound. And then, without any warning or noise, I looked up, and there he was. A man was standing inside the store. He was in one of the side aisles, just standing there halfway behind a shelf of canned soup, looking directly at me. I jumped, nearly dropping my phone. I hadn't heard the chime of the door, hadn't heard his footsteps. Nothing. Just suddenly, he was there. Tall, probably mid-40s, with a weathered jacket and a messy beard. His eyes darted away the second I noticed him, pretending to browse the shelf. I stood up and straightened my shirt, trying to calm the rush of adrenaline that had suddenly spiked in my chest. I greeted him with a nod, but he didn't respond. Instead, he began slowly walking through the aisles, occasionally glancing at me, like he was waiting for me to look away. There was something about him, something deeply off. He wasn't shopping. He wasn't looking at anything in particular. He was pacing, circling the shelves like he had no real intention of buying anything. My instincts kicked in, and I watched him closely. Then, just as quietly as he had appeared, he turned abruptly and walked toward the front of the store. I thought he might finally approach the register, but instead, he walked straight past it and exited the building. I hurried around the counter and followed to the window, watching as he walked past the car he had presumably arrived in and out toward the road. No headlights turned on, no doors opened. He simply kept walking, disappearing into the dark, until he was no longer visible under the parking lot lights. Confused, I turned back and reviewed the store footage. My heart pounded as I watched the security feed. The man had indeed pulled into the lot, sat in his car for a long time, then quietly slipped out and walked to the back of the building. Now here's the disturbing part. There's a door at the back of the store, used mainly for deliveries. We almost never use it during overnight hours. That door was unlocked. It was an oversight, one of those things you never think will be a problem until it is. That's how he got in. He slipped in through the back, crept into the store, and stood silently in the aisles, watching. But what truly sent chills down my spine was what the footage revealed next. Between the moment he entered the back door and the moment I saw him, there was a gap of 15 minutes. He had been in the store that whole time, silently watching from somewhere out of sight. I don't know how I missed him. I called the police. I gave them a full report, showed them the footage, pointed out the car in the video. It turned out the vehicle was stolen, reported missing from another state months earlier. There was no ID, no license plate, no traceable information, and as for the man, he vanished. The police asked me to walk through what I saw, what I remembered. But all I could really recall were his eyes. There was something in them. Not anger, not madness, but a cold calculation, like he had been planning something, waiting for the right moment. I still wonder what he was doing during those 15 silent minutes. Was he watching me? Was he hiding in the bathroom? Was he waiting for the store to empty before doing something more? The questions haunt me more than the answers ever could. The next night, I double-checked every door, triple-checked the locks, installed a motion sensor near the back entrance. I no longer scroll on my phone during late hours. I keep my eyes up. I stay alert. Because I know now, more than ever, how quietly danger can slip in through the back, unnoticed. Some nights are still slow. The silence still stretches across the early morning hours like a heavy blanket, but it doesn't comfort me anymore. Now, I listen for footsteps I can't hear. Story 4. It was a quiet Thursday night when everything changed. I was off work for once, something that rarely happened midweek, and with no obligations the next morning I decided to take full advantage of the time to myself. My roommate had gone out of town to visit his parents for a few days, which left me completely alone in our small 2-story house. I didn't mind the solitude, I actually kind of enjoyed it. It was the kind of evening where you kick back with a beer, throw on some background TV, and let the night fade into stillness. It was just past midnight when I first heard the sound. I was on the couch, half watching an old sitcom, and scrolling through my phone with a half-empty beer bottle resting on the coffee table. The noise came from above me, a faint, subtle thump. At first I didn't even register it as anything significant, maybe a pipe shifting or the usual creaks of an older house settling into the night. But something about it lingered in my mind, pulling me away from the screen. I muted the television, trying to focus. The house fell into silence except for the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional tick of the wall clock. I stared up at the ceiling, waiting for the noise to repeat, but the stillness stretched long enough to convince me I had imagined it. Just a harmless sound. I reached into the mini fridge beside the couch, grabbed another beer and cracked it open. The fizzing sound felt louder in the quiet room. But just as I raised the bottle to my lips, the noise came again. This time, it wasn't just a single thump, it was a soft, rhythmic creaking. Slow, deliberate footsteps moving across the floor in the room directly above me. My entire body tensed as the realization set in. My roommate was gone. I had been alone in the house all day. And yet, I could hear someone walking upstairs. I stood up slowly, setting the bottle down without taking a sip. My eyes stayed fixed on the ceiling, tracking the sound as it crept from one end of the upstairs hallway to the other. Each step echoed faintly through the walls, subtle but unmistakable. I crossed the living room and made my way to the bottom of the staircase, moving as quietly as I could. I called out my roommate's name, knowing it was pointless. He had left 2 days ago and wouldn't be back until the weekend. Still, I held out hope that there was some logical explanation, that maybe he'd come back early without telling me. There was no answer. I flipped the hallway light on, illuminating the stairs with a dim yellow glow. The house felt suddenly colder, the air dense with unease. I climbed each step carefully, my footfalls barely making a sound against the carpeted stairs. The hallway at the top was empty. The door to my roommate's room, however, was wide open. That stopped me in my tracks. I knew for a fact that I had closed that door. I remembered doing it. I hadn't gone into his room at all while he was away. He was particular about his things and I respected that boundary. So, why was it open now? I moved forward, calling his name again. Quieter this time, like I was afraid someone would actually answer. The room looked normal from the doorway. Bed made, blinds closed, no signs of disruption. But the feeling in my gut said otherwise. I stepped inside, glancing around, half expecting to see someone hiding in the closet or standing behind the door. But the room was empty. I checked the other rooms upstairs. My own, the bathroom, the small office we never really used. Nothing, no sign of anyone. No sign that anything had been touched or moved. It was as though the sound had never happened at all. But I knew what I had heard. The rest of that night passed in a haze. I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed with the light on, the covers pulled up to my chest, listening. Every creak of the floor, every gust of wind outside set my nerves on edge, but nothing else happened. No more footsteps, no more thumps from the ceiling. The following days were uneventful, and I tried to rationalize the whole thing. Maybe it had been an animal on the roof. Maybe the house really was just settling. I told myself 1,000 different explanations, but none of them ever really sat right. When my roommate returned, I asked if he had come back home for any reason. He looked confused and said no. He'd been with his family the entire time. I nodded, pretending that I hadn't expected that answer. But to this day, I still think about that moment. The sound of footsteps in a house I knew was empty. The open door that I hadn't touched. The quiet that followed. It felt like something had passed through my home that night, unnoticed by everyone but me. And though I've never heard the footsteps again, I still double-check every door before going to bed. I still pause the television sometimes, just to listen, just to be sure. Because sometimes the scariest things are the ones that happen only once. The things that never come back, but never leave your mind. Story 5. My name is Leo, and I've worked at a small pizza shop in my hometown for several years. It's one of those locally owned places that's been around forever, the kind of spot that smells like garlic and flour the moment you walk through the door. Most of my time is spent in the back, away from customers. I make pizzas, clean the stations, prep ingredients, and handle all the closing tasks when the day winds down. We've got a handful of high school students who handle the front counter in the evenings, but they usually clock out by 11. After that, it's just me, finishing up and locking everything down. It was a typical Monday shift. The night had been quiet. Orders slowed down after 9, and by the time my co-worker left at 11, I figured I could start cleaning up a little early. The routine was always the same. Wipe down the counters, shut off the ovens, take out the trash, restock what needed to be ready for the next day. I didn't expect any more customers. It was late, and most people didn't order food that close to closing time. The quiet hum of the refrigerators was the only sound filling the space. Just as I was sweeping near the kitchen, the phone rang. I sighed and walked over to answer, hoping it wasn't someone placing a last-minute order. "Thanks for calling," I said, using the usual line. But on the other end there was only silence. Just a breath. Faint, like the sound of someone thinking about what to say. Then the call disconnected. I stared at the phone for a moment, slightly annoyed, assuming it was a prank call or a customer who changed their mind. I went back to cleaning, trying to shake the strange tension that now hovered in the air. But not even 30 seconds later, the bell above the front door rang. Someone had walked in. I put the broom down and made my way out to the front. Standing at the counter was a man I didn't recognize. He wore a heavy, oversized coat and a black beanie that was pulled low over his messy hair. His eyes were tired, dark sunken, with dark circles underneath, like he hadn't slept in days. But they were open wide, unnaturally so, and fixed directly on me. Can I help you?" I asked, keeping a few feet between us. He stared at me for a second too long before responding. "I'd like to place an order," he said. His voice was dry and slow, like every word had to fight its way out of his mouth. There was something off about him, not just the way he looked, but how he stood, how he spoke. Everything about him felt wrong. I nodded and asked what he wanted, trying to keep things polite. But he didn't answer right away. Instead, he kept staring. When I looked down, I noticed something that made my stomach twist. His right hand was partially hidden inside his coat pocket, and sticking out from the side of it was the unmistakable glint of a knife handle. It was a kitchen knife, long and silver, the blade just barely visible under the fold of the fabric. He wasn't holding it in a threatening way, but he was holding it. And I knew he wasn't here for food. My throat tightened. I tried not to panic. I looked back up and locked eyes with him again. His face hadn't changed. No expression, no movement, just that same blank stare. At that moment, the front door opened behind him. A second customer walked in, completely unaware of the tension hanging in the air. The newcomer paused, clearly sensing something strange. He looked at me, then at the man standing at the counter. The man with the knife turned. Without a word, he walked past the new customer and out the door. He didn't run. He didn't look back. He just left. I stood frozen for a few seconds before grabbing the phone and calling 910.im. I explained everything to the operator while the other customer listened, wide-eyed. We both moved to the window and watched as the man walked across the parking lot and got into his car. It was old and beat up, parked just out of view from the front window. He pulled away quickly and disappeared into the night. The police came soon after. I showed them the security footage, described what he looked like, what I saw in his pocket. They took it seriously. After checking the footage again, they confirmed the car's license plate had been removed. Clean. Intentional. I still think about the phone call before he came in, the way he paused, the way he hung up. I believe he was watching from the parking lot, waiting to make sure I was alone before stepping inside. If that second customer hadn't walked in when he did, I don't know what might have happened. He wasn't there to place an order, that much is clear. The knife, the timing, the way he stared at me, it all pointed to something darker. Since that night, I've changed how I handle late shifts. I keep the doors locked after 11, and if someone wants to place a late pickup, they have to call in advance. I also added an alarm button under the counter, something we'd never had before. My boss didn't hesitate when I requested it. The man never came back, or if he did, I never saw him again. But the memory of his eyes, the cold emptiness in them, that's something I'll never forget. It's a reminder of how quickly an ordinary night can turn. How a quiet shift at a pizza shop can become something you carry with you for the rest of your life. Story 6. When I was 17, I lived with my parents in a house that had a finished basement. It wasn't one of those dark, musty cellars you see in horror movies. It was more like a cozy in-law suite. Carpeted floors, a clean bedroom, a small entertainment area and a quiet space where I could hang out, play games or sleep without being disturbed. It was my favorite part of the house, and I spent most of my time down there, especially when I had the place to myself. My parents both traveled for work quite a bit, and whenever they had overlapping trips, I'd have the house entirely to myself for several days at a time. As an only child, I was used to the solitude, and honestly, I enjoyed it. I could stay up late, make my own meals, and play games into the early morning hours without anyone telling me to turn the volume down. One Saturday evening during one of those trips, the sky had turned grey and heavy by the afternoon. A storm was rolling in. I'd seen the weather reports earlier in the day and decided to make a quick trip to the grocery store before things got bad. The wind was already picking up as I pulled out of the driveway. I grabbed some microwave meals, snacks and a few drinks. Nothing fancy, just enough to get through the night without needing to go out again. By the time I returned, the rain had started. Sheets of it poured down over the windshield as I parked in the driveway and ran to the front door. I was soaked by the time I got inside, but the warmth of the house wrapped around me, and I shook off the cold. I dried off and went straight into the kitchen to start dinner, setting the oven to preheat and placing one of the frozen meals on a tray. That's when I heard it, a soft crash from below. At first I thought maybe the storm had knocked something over outside, but then I realized it had come from the basement. It wasn't loud, more like the sound of something tipping over and landing on carpet, a soft thud, muffled but distinct. I paused for a second, trying to think rationally. Maybe one of the boxes in the storage room had shifted and fallen. Maybe the wind had rattled the house just enough to knock something loose. That's all it had to be. Still, I felt a strange sense of urgency. Not fear exactly, but a gnawing need to check. If something had fallen, I didn't want to risk it causing a mess. Or worse, damaging anything valuable. I opened the basement door and flipped on the lights. The warm glow illuminated the stairs and the familiar sight of the basement below. As I stepped down, the air grew cooler. I listened carefully but didn't hear anything else. No movement, no voices, no creaking. Just the soft hum of the lights above and the sound of rain battering the house from all sides. I reached the bottom and walked through the main living area. My TV, the small couch, the shelves stacked with games and books, everything was in its place. I turned toward the storage room. It was the only unfinished part of the basement. A narrow room filled with old holiday decorations, dusty boxes of memorabilia, and shelves lined with forgotten odds and ends. I opened the door and stepped inside. The smell of old cardboard and wood filled the air. I glanced around, and at first everything looked normal. The boxes were still stacked, Nothing appeared out of place, but then I noticed one box on top of a pile near the back of the room had its lid partially open. I walked over and peeked inside. It was filled with old sports trophies. My parents had kept them from when I was younger: baseball, soccer, karate, but they weren't arranged like they had been before. The contents were scattered and broken. Trophies were chipped, toppled, some even missing parts. It looked like the box had fallen. Everything inside had shattered, and then someone had quickly tried to shove it all back in to cover it up. That was the moment it clicked. Someone had been down here. A chill ran up my spine. I looked around the room again, but now with a different sense, scanning for shadows, corners, anything that looked unusual. And then, from the back of the room, something shifted. A box fell, and behind it, someone moved. He was tall and dressed in dark clothes. I didn't get a clear look at his face before instinct took over and I turned and bolted. I heard him coming after me, his footsteps pounding against the carpeted floor just seconds behind mine. I sprinted up the stairs, skipping the last few steps in one leap, but in my panic, I slammed my foot awkwardly and fell forward, crashing onto the floor at the top of the staircase. For a terrifying moment, I was frozen. The wind had been knocked out of me. I could hear his footsteps behind me getting closer, but then they stopped. I twisted my body around to look, expecting the worst, but instead of lunging toward me, the man had turned and ran for the front door. He yanked it open and disappeared into the night, leaving the door wide open behind him. I scrambled to my feet and slammed it shut, locking it with shaking hands. Then I grabbed the cordless phone and dialed 911. When the police arrived, they searched the house thoroughly. They found a basement window slightly ajar, the one near the side of the house, hidden by some overgrown bushes. It looked like it had been pried open from the outside. That's how he got in. He could have been inside the house for hours. What he was doing, what he was looking for, I'll never know. Nothing appeared stolen, nothing was missing from the main floor. But the trophies, those broken memories, were proof that he'd been there, rummaging through things, creeping through a space I had always considered safe. I stayed at a friend's house for the next couple of nights. I couldn't bring myself to go back to sleep in the basement. The idea that someone had been standing in that dark storage room, hidden just feet away, waiting. It was something that took a long time to let go of. To this day, I still can't go into basements without feeling uneasy, and I always double-check every window, especially the ones that face the ground. Because sometimes the danger doesn't knock. Sometimes it slips quietly through a forgotten crack, moves through your space like a shadow, and waits for the right moment to make itself known. Story 7. I had been working longer hours than usual due to a security breach at our company which had everyone on edge. It wasn't anything dramatic or dangerous, just enough to disrupt our normal schedules and demand some overtime. Normally I took the train to and from work, avoiding traffic and zoning out with my headphones, but with all the unexpected late nights, I had no choice but to start driving. The trains didn't run that late, and I didn't want to get stranded halfway home. It was a little past midnight when I finally wrapped up everything at the office. I felt drained, mentally and physically. I just wanted to get home, throw off my work clothes and collapse into bed. As I made my way through the city streets, my eyes flicked to the fuel gauge, and a flicker of anxiety passed through me. The tank was almost empty. I didn't remember it being that low before I parked that morning, but I'd been too tired to notice anything. I wasn't worried though. I knew there was a gas station near my house. I just had to get there. I turned onto the highway, the road stretching out into darkness. City lights faded behind me. Traffic was light, and the quiet gave me a false sense of peace. Then, 10 minutes later, a warning lit up on my dashboard: low fuel. My heart sank. The needle had dropped alarmingly fast, way faster than it should have. It wasn't just low, it was on the brink of empty. I kept driving, watching the numbers tick down with disbelief. And then, without any sputter or warning, the engine cut off completely. The car coasted silently. As I pulled over to the shoulder and came to a stop, I tried the ignition. Nothing, just a hollow click. The silence was unsettling, the kind of silence that makes your skin feel too tight. I sat there for a moment, stunned. I reached into the glove compartment and pulled out a flashlight, stepping out of the car and into the cold air. The highway was still. The only sound was the occasional rush of wind and distant traffic far off behind me. I leaned down and looked under the car. That's when I saw it. A glistening puddle beneath the fuel tank. Not a puncture, a deliberate slice. Someone had tampered with my car. Before I could process that thought fully, headlights flashed behind me. A truck pulled up to the shoulder, about 30 feet back. It came to a stop without hesitation, too quick. Its lights were off before the engine even finished settling. That was the moment I knew something was really wrong. I stood up straight and faced the vehicle. There were figures moving inside, not more than one. I couldn't make out their faces through the windshield. I raised my voice, hoping to sound calm. "I'm okay, don't need help," I called out. No response. No movement. A few seconds later, the driver's side door opened and a man stepped out. He walked slowly, casually, with a strange smile on his face. There was something rehearsed about his posture, like he'd practiced this moment. He looked like he was in his late 30s, wearing a jacket that seemed too heavy for the weather. His voice cut through the still air. "Need a ride? I can take you home." He was too friendly, too casual. The smile didn't reach his eyes. I backed up a step, careful not to make it too obvious. "No thanks," I replied, trying to keep my tone neutral. "Police are on their way. I already called." That was a lie, but I needed something to throw him off. His smile faltered. For a long second he didn't say anything, just stood there, staring. Then, slowly, he turned and walked back toward the truck. I let out a shaky breath, hoping that was the end of it. But before he climbed back in, I saw something that made my blood run cold. Pressed up against the inside of the back window was a face, wide eyes, pale, frozen in a look of fear. It wasn't just a glance, it was someone silently screaming for help without making a sound. Before I could take another step, the man turned, saw me looking, and slammed the door shut. The truck's engine roared to life. It drove past me slowly, and we locked eyes as it passed. His stare was empty now, cold and unreadable. And then, just like that, he was gone. The police arrived about 15 minutes later. I told them everything. The leaking gas tank, the man, the truck, the face in the back window. They searched the area, looked for tracks, checked traffic cams, but nothing turned up. The gas tank had been intentionally slashed, probably while I was at work. The plan was simple: disable the car, wait for me to break down, and offer a ride. Whatever they had in mind, it wasn't just theft. It was planned, coordinated, and practiced. I kept thinking about the person in the back of that truck. I don't know who they were or if they ever got away. I wish I had done more. Taken a picture, gotten the full license plate, something. But in the moment, my brain was just trying to get me out alive. Since that night, I check my car every time I leave work. I park under lights. I avoid late drives when I can help it. Because that night changed something in me. It reminded me that not all danger announces itself with screams or violence. Sometimes it shows up with a smile and an offer to help. Story 8. It was early autumn when I decided to take a solo backpacking trip through one of Washington State's national parks. The weather had already begun to turn crisp. and most casual hikers weren't as eager to hit the trails in the cooler air. That's exactly why I went. The quiet, the solitude, the feeling of being completely immersed in nature. I'd spent the last 2 days hiking further and further from the nearest road, logging more than 20 miles into the wilderness. During that entire time, I hadn't encountered a single person, just the rustling of animals in the trees and the distant sound of wind brushing against the tall pines. On the morning of the 3rd day, I packed up my gear and made a quick cup of coffee over my portable stove. My next campsite was another 6 miles out, which may not sound far, but with the elevation changes and narrow winding paths, I knew it would be at least a 4-hour hike. I hit the trail with confidence, the cool air filling my lungs as I passed through towering evergreens and stretches of rocky terrain. About halfway through the hike, I heard something that pulled me from my meditative rhythm. Footsteps ahead of me. I looked up, and sure enough, a man was walking toward me on the trail, heading in the opposite direction. It surprised me. I hadn't seen a single soul for 2 full days, and this area wasn't exactly a popular spot in the off-season. Still, I smiled as we passed each other, offering a friendly nod. He didn't respond, just kept walking with a neutral expression, eyes focused straight ahead. What struck me as strange was that he didn't have any gear. No backpack, no water bottle, not even a jacket, just a long-sleeved shirt and some well-worn hiking pants. It was cold out and the trail was remote. No one came out here unprepared. The whole thing gave me a strange feeling in the pit of my stomach, but I kept walking, trying to shake the unease. About an hour later, I reached the next designated campsite. It was tucked into a small clearing with just enough space for 1 or 2 tents. I'd seen pictures of it before and remembered it was supposed to have a great view, but when I arrived, I was disappointed. The tree coverage was dense, and there was barely any visibility beyond the clearing. Still, I was tired and figured I'd make the best of it. I unpacked my gear, pitched my tent, and set up a small fire. As the sun dipped low behind the trees, I sat back and watched the soft orange light flicker through the branches. It should have been peaceful, but something still felt off. Then I heard it. A soft shuffling sound from behind me. I turned around quickly and my heart stopped. There, standing at the edge of the clearing, was the same man I had passed earlier. He still didn't have a backpack. No jacket, no gear, nothing but the clothes on his back. And now he was at my campsite. My mind raced. He had been heading in the opposite direction when I passed him. In order for him to be here now, he would have had to turn round almost immediately after we crossed paths. And somehow he had covered the same ground, much faster than I had. There was no reason for him to be here. No trail marker, no lookout point, nothing. He didn't say anything, didn't even look at me. He just walked to the opposite end of the clearing, sat down on the ground and stared off into the woods. I sat completely still. My campfire crackled softly beside me, but the warmth didn't bring any comfort. I watched him closely, trying to make sense of the situation. He sat with his back to me, unmoving for nearly half an hour. I couldn't bring myself to speak. The way he had just inserted himself into this remote location without acknowledgement, without a word, it felt unnatural. It felt wrong. Eventually, I decided I couldn't stay. I slowly packed up my gear, trying to make as little noise as possible. As I was zipping my tent shut and strapping my pack, I saw him turn. His head shifted slightly in my direction, and then his entire body. He was staring at me now, not blinking, just watching. The moment I slung my bag over my shoulders, he stood up. I turned and started walking down the trail, quickening my pace. I didn't run, but I walked fast enough that my heartbeat started to rise. Every few seconds, I glanced over my shoulder. At first, I didn't see him, but then, about 100 feet back, I spotted him on the trail, following me. I didn't want to panic, but my breath was coming faster now. I clutched my pocket knife in one hand, the other gripping the shoulder strap of my backpack. I kept moving, letting the trail guide me. Then, after rounding a bend, I made a decision. I stepped off the path into the dense woods. The trees swallowed me quickly. I moved quietly, ducking behind a large pine and kneeling down. My breath was shallow. I waited. About 30 seconds later, I heard footsteps approaching. The man walked past where I had left the trail, still following the path. But he stopped just a few feet away, then slowly turned his head. He stood there for what felt like forever, scanning the forest. And then he called out. His voice was soft and oddly cheerful. He said hello, he asked if I was lost, he said he could help me. His tone made my skin crawl. After a minute he stopped speaking, and then he did something even worse. Instead of continuing down the trail, he stepped into the woods, just like I had, but on the opposite side. I stayed completely still, listening to the crunch of leaves fade deeper into the forest. I don't know how long I stayed there, maybe half an hour, maybe more. When I finally felt sure he was gone, I returned to the trail and started walking again. I didn't stop until I made it back to town the next afternoon. When I returned, I filed a report with the local authorities. They didn't have any open cases that matched my description. No missing hikers. No reports of suspicious behavior in the area. They didn't follow up. I'll never know who that man was. Whether he was living out there in the woods, preying on solo hikers, or whether he had followed me from an earlier point. But I do know this. I was lucky. Lucky that I listened to my instincts. Lucky that I chose to hide. Lucky that I never let him get close. Because the scariest part wasn't that he followed me. It was that he knew I had left the trail. And he tried to follow me into the trees. Story 9. When I was a child, I used to sleep in the attic room of our old house. It wasn't one of those creepy, unfinished attics filled with cobwebs and creaking floorboards. My parents had renovated it before I was born, transforming the space into a cozy bedroom with slanted ceilings, soft carpeting, and a small window that looked out over the backyard. It was quiet up there, removed from the rest of the house, and I liked that. It felt like my own little world. One thing that always stood out though was the air vent on the far side of the room. It was an older home, and the vent connected directly to the long ductwork that ran throughout the house. At night, I could sometimes hear voices through it, muffled conversations from my parents downstairs, or the sound of the television drifting up the channels of air. It never bothered me. In fact, it made me feel connected to the rest of the house. I used to fall asleep listening to those faint murmurs. But then, when I was about 9 years old, I started hearing something different. It wasn't my parents' voices, and it didn't sound like the television. It was softer, closer, like someone whispering just beneath the floor. I remember lying in bed one night, eyes wide open in the dark, hearing my name carried through the vent. Not shouted, not spoken aloud, just breathed out. Like someone was lying directly below the duct, murmuring up toward my ceiling. At first I told myself it was a dream. I'd been half asleep, drifting, and maybe my imagination had played a trick on me, but then it happened again and again, always late at night, always when the house had gone quiet. I'd lie there in bed, frozen, listening to the faint rustle of static and soft breathing followed by quiet, deliberate whispers that never quite made sense. Sometimes it was my name, other times it was just fragments, broken words that faded before they could form. One night I got brave. I climbed out of bed, tiptoed across the carpet and knelt beside the vent. I pressed my ear to it, holding my breath, trying to catch the source of the sound. For a long time there was nothing, just the hollow stillness of air. And then, so softly I thought I imagined it, a voice said, "I see you." I stumbled back from the vent, falling onto the floor. I didn't scream. I didn't run. I just crawled back into bed and pulled the blankets over my head, trembling until morning. After that, I stopped sleeping with the lights off. I kept a small lamp by my bed and turned it on every night, hoping the glow would keep whatever it was away. I told my parents once, but they brushed it off as a dream or maybe an overactive imagination. They meant well, but I could tell. They didn't believe me. The whispering continued for weeks. Sometimes it would stop for a night or two and I'd think maybe it was over, but it always came back. I started to dread bedtime. I'd stare at the vent, heart pounding, waiting for the faint hiss of breath that meant the voice had returned. I got used to it, in a way. I never responded, I never acknowledged it. I just lay still and waited for it to pass. Years later, long after we moved out of that house, my parents and I were sitting around the table, reminiscing. I brought up the attic room and laughed nervously about how I used to think I heard voices. My mum paused, then smiled gently. "You always had the wildest imagination," she said. "But you know what's strange? After we moved out, the new owners called us." I looked at her, confused. She went on. "They wanted to ask about the ductwork, said they heard noises in the attic vent, whispering, actually. At first we thought they were joking." I felt my blood run cold. We never found out what caused the sounds. No animals in the vents, no weird acoustics, nothing, just a voice that whispered through the air night after night. A voice that waited patiently, never showing itself, never leaving, just whispering from the shadows beneath the floor. Now, even as an adult, I can't sleep with my back turned to the vent. I keep furniture in front of them if I can. I know how ridiculous that sounds. I know there's probably an explanation somewhere. But some part of me still remembers what it felt like to kneel beside that vent and hear something not of this world breathe my name in the dark.